Welcome back to the Algarve. 6 months already, flown by. Incident-free and also maybe excitement-free. 6 months with the Honda Transalp 750. Is it a keeper or should I change it? Right, so I've divided the review into convenient chapters, but they're in no particular order. So do feel free to skip ahead to the sections that interest you, and at the end I'll give you my thoughts on whether or not this bike is a keeper. Now, a quick word on how I use the Transalp. All my bikes are for pleasure only. I work from home and so don't commute. I live in southern Portugal where it hardly ever rains, and I rarely venture out on a bike when it's dark. I belong to a few riding groups like this one, and we nearly always stick to the kind of roads you can see here, the Algarve Hills, occasionally venturing east into Spain. So far I've taken the Transalp on one longish 3-day trip to Gibraltar, video link in the description, and I have another planned for the new year in the Pyrenees. And for those of you new to the channel, I also have a Triumph Speed Twin 1200 for fun and a Honda ADV 350 scooter for trips to the supermarket and or beach with Mrs. RM. Options and accessories. I wanted to start with a clean slate and kit out the Transalp to suit my personal needs. As such, the only factory option I wanted was the quick shifter, and as luck would have it, Honda Portugal were offering this free on all orders placed in the first week after launch. My local dealer also offered, I think it was €400 worth of accessories as part of the deal, so I took the tall windscreen, wind deflectors, heated grips, radiator guard which I painted black to better blend in, and a 12-volt charging socket. I actually used the standard USB socket under the seat to charge my phone via a cable I ran along the tank and up to the dash, but I thought an extra charging point may come in handy. I wanted to go aftermarket for luggage and crash protection, as I think this offers better value for money and is, at least to my tastes, more visually appealing than what Honda offers. I made a full video on this if you want more details, but in a nutshell, I went with SW Motec Pro bags and their new Dusk hard cases, and Hepco Becker crash bars and sump guard. I also fitted some Barkbuster handguards, as these are considered pretty much the gold standard by those with far more off-road experience than me, and they weren't much more expensive than the basic plastic guards that Honda offer. What about fuel consumption then? According to the trip computer, which I've never reset, I have averaged 3.8 litres per 100 kilometres since I got the bike, which equates to 74 mpg UK, 62 US. On a long, steady ride, this can drop to 3.6, 78 UK, 65 US, and equally when I'm pushing hard on the motorway, I've seen it rise as far as 4.3 or 65 UK, 55 US. Now, I think this is pretty remarkable for a 750cc engine, and I can only congratulate Honda's engineers for giving us such an economic bike. So if I take the 3.8 litre figure and the 16.9 litre official tank capacity, this gives a theoretical range of about 440 kilometres or 275 miles, which is very acceptable. Unfortunately, the engineers didn't see fit to give us a fuel range display on the dash. There's a fuel gauge, of course, but it's one of those that stays full for what seems like half a tank, and then the 5 or 6 remaining bricks disappear every 10 kilometres or so. I know you can do the maths, but why should we have to? And it just means I stop for fuel earlier than I really need, because I'm never really sure how much fuel is still in the tank. Let's be generous and call this an oversight rather than a deliberate and cynical marketing move designed to get us to buy the more expensive Africa Twin. But I hope they rectify it in a software update, because it's an unnecessary omission, particularly when instead, as if to rub salt into the wound, they give us a grip angle function to tell you how many degrees your wrist is twisting the throttle. How about comfort? Now, many people complain about the seat being too hard, but I don't find it any worse than on any other bike, Goldwing accepted perhaps. Either I've got phenomenally resilient buttocks, or else I've only ever ridden uncomfortable motorbikes. I've experimented with various gel cushions, but these raise the seat height and by extension the centre of mass with the rider on, so I don't usually bother with them. Yes, you're glad for a stop after an hour or so riding, but I do anyway for a coffee or a photo shoot like this, or a refuel or whatever. And isn't the lack of comfort part of the motorcycling experience? Otherwise you can just take the car. In any case, the riding position is excellent, at least for my 6'2" frame. I can easily flat-foot both feet at a standstill, and the rider triangle, as it's called, is one of the most relaxing I've experienced on any bike. No aches or pains, even on a long ride. Perfect weight on my wrists and feet. There's very good wind protection too, especially for an adventure bike, even with the standard short screen. The tank is relatively wide and shaped to channel the air around your hips and bust. When my bike was delivered, it had the standard screen with the 4 optional deflectors fitted. This was fine, but as I'm relatively tall, I could still feel wind on the top of my helmet, and the screw-on top deflector I borrowed from my scooter to experiment with didn't seem very effective, so I fitted Honda's tall screen, and this seems to have totally cured the problem. What about vibrations? Well, they're okay, but only okay. One of the problems with installing crash bars and other metal accessories to a bike is that these can amplify any vibrations that are already present, and this seems to be the case with the Hepco Becker protection I've fitted, so I'll probably be adding some nylon washers all round to try and attenuate the vibrations. It's not bad, it's better than my 2019 CB500X, for example, but it's noticeable, particularly through the grips, and this despite the grip puppies I fit to all my bikes. Noise, well, it's a parallel twin, so you'll never have the smoothness of a straight 6, but it's decent enough. The engine can be a bit clattery under load, but the exhaust note is very nice and bassy. Regular viewers will recall that Akropovich recently sent me their NCAN for review. This improves things further with an even bassier burble and slightly lower sound levels. Whether it's worth the €950 asking price is debatable, but I prefer the more subdued, deeper note, so I'll be keeping it on. The suspension, predictably for a mid-range Honda designed to be as accessible as possible, is on the soft side, not to say wallowy when you're pushing on around bends. I've increased the preload front and rear, and this has helped a bit, but the rear shock in particular is a bit lazy on rebound. Some owners have already ponied up and made the necessary improvements, and by all accounts the bike is transformed. Having done something similar on my own Speed Twin, I can confirm that the improvements are very significant, but of course it's an expensive job and so only worth considering if you intend keeping the bike for a good few years. So how about the brakes? Well, bikes designed for off-road duties usually have soft brakes to avoid the rider locking up the front wheel or setting off the ABS on loose surfaces, and the Transalp is no exception. Initial bite is deliberately limited, but you quickly get used to it and it's not really a problem. Overall braking efficiency is good and well up to the job of slowing this relatively light bike down. The soft suspension, alluded to above, means there's a lot of fork dive though. Again, not really a problem once you know what to expect, but we're a long way off the stability of BMW's telelever system. It's not a criticism, just an observation. At €10,600, the Transalp costs literally half the €21,000 asking price of the base 1300 GS, so we can hardly expect the same levels of sophistication. What about the engine and gearbox? The engine is nearly a peach, nearly but not quite. It's surprisingly punchy for a 750 adventure bike, especially a Honda adventure bike, and really gets a shift on in the lower gears. It's torquey low down, though not as much as the Suzuki 800, and it revs cleanly through the rev range. The only time I really feel a lack of response is in top gear, 6th gear, at say 120, 130 kilometers an hour, 80, 85 miles an hour, when I'm looking to overtake. Twist the throttle and there's not much there. It feels as if it's given all it has to give, making a swift change down to 5th a necessity. Once you've done that though, it will zip you past the vehicle in front, no problem. I'm pleased to report that the quick shifter is an absolute peach. Up and down, you can definitely tell we're on the 3rd or 4th generation technology here. It's far smoother than the up-only shifter I had back on my 2017 Triumph Street Triple. You can even adjust the harshness of the shift in the menu, although to be honest I just keep mine on soft. I'm quite happy being able to change gear in a 1/10 of a second. Setting it to hard would probably allow me to change in a 1/12 of a second, but I think this is one instance where being soft is preferable to being hard. Otherwise, if you use the clutch, of course, this being a Honda and all, the gear changes are light and easy. Gearing is on the tall side, so as I mentioned above, you do have to drop down a gear or two when you want to accelerate hard, and 6th gear is almost like an overdrive, but again, you get used to it quickly enough, and I guess it does contribute towards the remarkable fuel consumption. I also find that engine braking is on the strong side on the Transalp. Stick it in third gear on roads like this and you can approach a bend without having to brake at all. A bit like an electric car, the engine will happily slow you down on its own. It can be adjusted in the settings, but only in user mode. Talking of which, there is a noticeable difference between the 4 riding modes: road, rain, sport and gravel. And this is a good thing. Only a few years ago, the only difference I could ever detect when changing modes on a bike was the light on the dash. Now, with the Transalp, you can definitely feel the change. It doesn't rain much here in the Algarve, so I rarely use rain mode, but it does smooth things out nicely, and I tend to use it off-road. At the other end of the spectrum, sport mode, which I use 98% of the time, livens things up considerably. It can be a bit jerky around town, but throttle response on the open road like this suits my riding style perfectly. Gravel mode, on the other hand, is horrid and, in my opinion, a waste of time. The problem is that traction control is far too keen, cutting power to the wheel at the slightest hint of a slip. This means that going up a hill on a loose surface is extremely difficult, so when I do go off-road, I tend to use rain mode as a better compromise than gravel. Incidentally, I was talking to a friend the other day about off-roading, actually the guy that you could see in front of me on the road clip on the Desert X. A bit like me with the Transalp, he bought his bike with a view to exploring the many fire tracks and gravel roads we have here in the Algarve, like this one. But again, a bit like me, realised quite quickly that despite what manufacturers' life is an adventure advertising clips might suggest, it's actually far more rewarding to thrash a clapped-out lightweight 250cc enduro bike off-road than risk an overpowered, overpriced adventure bike. The Transalp can do it. As you can see here, it's an all-rounder, and it will get you home after your off-road capers in far greater comfort and safety than said clapped-out 250. But for me personally, venturing off-road will always be a nice option rather than an objective. If I notice an intriguing-looking track through the forest while enjoying lunch at a restaurant, then I'll happily explore it after dessert, and the Transalp is more than up to the task. But setting out from home with the aim of scaling a mountain just for the hell of it isn't really my thing. Horses for courses, I get that many of you enjoy that, and it's great. But my off-road skills are limited, and as such, I don't really feel qualified to talk in any depth about the Transalp's abilities off the beaten track. The TFT screen is excellent, very easy to read even in bright sunshine, but it is a bit on the small side, at least for my aging eyesight. All the information you need is there, but the line along the bottom, for example, is a bit small to read at a glance while riding. And it has to be said that some of the facts at your disposal such as instant fuel consumption or the now infamous grip angle, are a bit pointless really. Honda, please just give us fuel range or ambient temperature. Otherwise, you do have the option of 4 different display types, each of which can be displayed on a white or a black background, or even set to automatic for auto switching between day and night. I find the one you can see in this clip the most convenient for reading speed and revs. Can't remember what it's called, but anyway, I leave it set to that. As already mentioned, one glaring and needless omission is range. We get everything else fuel related, so why not just give us the one piece of information we actually need? I know you want us to upgrade to the Africa Twin, but I for one won't, because it's still, even with the new 2024 model, too big, too heavy, too expensive and too underpowered. 20,000 euros for only 100 horsepower? Come on, Honda. Power's an interesting point actually. I often receive comments from viewers angry that I dare to suggest that the 47-48 horsepower on a Royal Enfield Interceptor or a Honda CB500X, for example, is not enough, or you don't need 120 horsepower in the real world, much less off-road. Well, I guess it's all down to personal priorities, but for me, and remember that I ride for fun only, anything with less than about 80 horsepower just doesn't cut it. The Transalp's 92 horsepower is only just enough for me. Fair enough, I'll probably only use 20 horsepower off-road, but when the mucking about's over and when I've paid the restaurant bill and just want to get home as quickly as possible, the idea of being whisked back to civilization by 120 or 140 horsepower is far preferable to pootling back on full throttle at 57 miles an hour up a hill because that's all the bike will give me. Anyway, I digress. Back to the dash. The controls for the on-screen menus aren't particularly intuitive, with short and long presses needed depending on where you are in each menu. I also don't find the switches particularly nice to operate. The buttons are all a bit hard and feel a bit cheap. Certainly a notch down from, say, the Triumph Tiger 900. The Transalp switches aren't backlit either, which I know is an annoyance to those riders who ride in the dark. Then, of course, there's the inverted horn indicator buttons, common to all Hondas. It's not a problem if you only ride Hondas, you get used to it. But I took my Speed Twin out this morning, for example, and beeped the horn by mistake twice when I actually wanted to cancel the indicators. Maintenance and reliability. Everyday maintenance, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag if I'm honest. The tyre valves are straight rather than 90 degrees. Yes, I know that's because they're tubed, but surely can't somebody invent an angled tyre valve for an inner tube? The 21-inch front provides plenty of room to get the pump nozzle thing on, but it can be a bit of a squeeze on the smaller 18-inch rear, what with the swing arm exhaust and in my case the pannier racks. Manoeuvring the bike from a standstill in your garage, for example, is also slightly awkward despite the very respectable 208 kilos curb weight. It's a tall bike, quite wide at the handlebars, and it certainly requires a lot more effort than my Speed Twin, which weighs 8 kilos more, but where all the weight is much lower down. Oversimplifying it a bit, I'd say everything on the Triumph is waist height, whereas the Honda is chest height, and that does make a difference. Cleaning and lubing the chain is a chore that I don't think anyone enjoys, but it's no more difficult on the Transalp than any other bike, except maybe for my Speed Twin, which has its chain on the right-hand side of the bike, making access a bit easier. As I opted not to have the centre stand on the Transalp, I use a paddock stand, or sometimes just roll the bike back and forth in the garage. Filling up with petrol is a bit annoying because, like on my 2019 CB500X, there's a baffle inside the opening in the tank, which according to the manual you're not supposed to fill beyond. This makes inserting the fuel nozzle a bit more awkward and also wastes a litre or so of tank capacity. To be honest, I always fill to the top of the tank and I've never had any problem. Finally, the air filter. Yes, it's under the tank at the front, which is annoying if you're doing a lot of dusty off-roading. I don't, but I have removed the filter for cleaning once just to see how difficult it was. It's not a hard job, but it does involve removing or rather lifting the tank, which is a shame on an adventure bike. Proper off-roaders tend to put the filter in a much more accessible place to encourage regular cleaning. What about reliability? Well, this is a brand new bike and only time will tell. I personally haven't had any, touch wood, problems, but I've seen a couple of issues crop up in discussion groups. Excessive tyre noise from both the Dunlops and Metzlers, particularly for the first 600 miles, stroke 1,000 kilometres, which actually I did notice. Skipping front suspension, which dealers don't seem able to diagnose, and high revving engine for a few seconds when backing off the throttle in certain situations. Nothing particularly alarming, and as I say, I haven't encountered any of these personally, except for the tyre noise, which has now gone away. But it's unusual for a Honda and perhaps indicative of a little too much cost cutting. Fit and finish on the whole is very good, typical Honda, excellent paintwork, and all visible, touchable parts are good quality. It's not quite Triumph or BMW, but certainly better than, say, Yamaha. There are a couple of signs of cheaping out, like the aforementioned switchgear, or for example this dealer-installed heated grips cable, just sort of folded over on itself with the wires exposed to the elements. But on the whole, fit and finish are very good. A couple of owners have reported stains appearing on their gold rims, but I don't know the full story and haven't encountered this problem personally, so I can't really comment. Suggestions for the Transalp 2.0 facelift? Well, even before the bike was launched, people were moaning about the tubed tyres and lack of cruise control. I don't want to get into that debate again, but yes, obviously I would prefer tubeless rims, but they're more expensive to produce, so you can't have everything, competitively priced or well equipped. Cruise control would be nice, although it's not a deal breaker for me personally. It's relatively cheap to implement as the bike is already ride-by-wire, But just like fuel range, I can't help thinking they do this kind of thing deliberately so that you upgrade to the next model in the range. If Honda's engineers were to ask me, I think I'd really just ask for better suspension. I'd be quite happy to pay an extra €200, say, for a better rear shock, better forks, rubber damped handlebars would also be nice, and surely they wouldn't cost too much to implement. We're seeing more and more bikes come with this feature now, and it does help. The worst of the Transalp's vibrations are through the bars, as opposed to the seat and foot pegs, so a bit of damping on in the bar clamp would be most welcome. Oh yeah, and another 30 horsepower. Now, just kidding. I know that's not going to happen, as nice as it would be. How about the competitors? Well, if you're looking at a Transalp, then as likely as not, you're also considering alternatives from other manufacturers. Here's my take on some of the current competition. Tracer 9 GT, fabulous engine, but poorly finished and noisy windscreen. Suzuki 800DE, more low-down torque than the Transalp, but the engine gives off far too much heat for me to consider buying one while I'm still in southern Portugal. Oh yes, and the exhaust looks like a pedal bin. The new Triumph Tiger 900 looks very tasty, appeals to me more than the Mark 1, but it's still expensive for a 900, and despite the power hike for 2024, it still only has 106 horsepower. I'd also need to check that the redesigned front fairing really does duct the hot air away from the radiator towards the rider's knees, and that they've reined in the vibrations a bit. Africa Twin, great bike, but it's a lot more expensive than the Transalp and still only 102 horsepower. Come on, Honda, that's only 10 more than the Transalp. And finally, two left field choices. There's also the forthcoming Triumph Scrambler 400X and Royal Enfield Himalayan. Yes, I know, 40 horsepower, single cylinders, not really tall rounder adventure bikes, but they could be characterful. And the Himalayan will have the optional tubeless rims, apparently, if that's important to you. I've put a deposit down on a green Triumph 400X delivery in February if I like the test ride on my dealer's demonstrator in December. So if you want to know how that goes, please consider subscribing. So, in conclusion, is the Transalp a keeper? Yes, for normal people. Honestly, apart from the relatively minor niggles I've alluded to, I haven't really got anything massively negative to say about this bike. Of course, tubeless tyres, cruise control, Öhlins all round, and another 30 horsepower would be fantastic, but you'd never get all that for €10,600. I can live within the tubes, but perhaps my biggest gripe with the bike is an intangible. Its soul. The Transalp is what in the UK they call a tall rounder. It can do everything from off-roading to motorway cruising quite well. It doesn't have any glaring faults, but by the same token, it's not absolutely fantastic at anything. As Doug DeMuro might say, where are the quirks and features? To say it's boring or even a bit vanilla would be grossly unfair. It's much better than that. The perky engine means it's in a different league from, say, the CB500X, its smaller brother. But when friends ask me, as they frequently do, what I think of my 2023 Transalp, I just love to have something, one thing exciting or unique to tell them about it. My ADV 350 is super practical, my Speed Twin has massive torque, and my Transalp just does what it says on the tin. Now, of course, this is what many owners are looking for. Reliability, comfort, cheap to buy, easy to maintain, excellent dealer network just about anywhere in the world, and this is what attracted me. Make no mistake, the Transalp is way more characterful than, the poor old NT1100 to name but one, and at least here in Europe we get the full fat version. Poor North America gets 10 horsepower less, a single barrel exhaust, and perhaps most disappointing of all, the black paint scheme only. At least we get the gold rims. So is it a keeper? Well, insofar as I haven't seen another bike that appeals to me more, yes, I'm hanging on to my Honda. That said, when this video goes out, early November 2023, the big EICMA bike show in Milan will just be a few days away, and I'm due to test ride the BMW R1300 GS in a week or so, and I've got the Triumph 400X coming, probably, so you never know. Now, I'm aware that I haven't covered riding 2-up or in the rain or when it's dark, and I apologise for that, but I don't really do any of the above, I'm afraid. Anyway, that's just about it for this video. Let me know your thoughts if you're an owner. What changes would you like to see, bearing in mind it still has to be competitively priced? And if you're thinking about buying a new one, ask away. What would you like to know that I haven't covered in this review? As always, thanks for watching.